Depth of field. What is depth of field? What affects depth of field? How can we understand using depth of field? And how can that understanding of depth of field help us to take better photos? Depth of field, sometimes referred to as DOF, is the distance wherein objects are in focus. So it's the amount of distance between the nearest and the farthest objects that appear in acceptably sharp focus in a photo. So it can be really subjective, meaning that it's a matter of personal preference. So trying to determine the appropriate depth of field is really based on personal opinion. Depth of field, like we mentioned, is the zone of sharpest focus that's in front of or behind and around the subject which the lens is focused on, that specific subject. So generally, the closer the subject to the camera, the more evenly with the distribution of depth of field in front of and behind the subject. As that distance of focus extends or gets further away, the depth of field usually will be more behind than in front of the focused area. Now, before we go into a lot of detail with how we do this on our cameras, I want to talk to you about one more thing, which is called circle of confusion. Circle of confusion, to be honest, is confusing. So circle of confusion is how much out of focus things are. So it's how much out of focus is all dependent on the circle of confusion. So when we take a photo, technically only the subject that's in focus and other objects that are at that same distance are in focus. Everything else in front of and behind are out of focus. So this is where we talk about the circle of confusion. So imagine you have 3 dots. Imagine you're photographing 3 dots, the tiniest dots that the human eye can possibly see at 20/20 vision and with ideal lighting conditions. So those 3 dots are arranged, but they're arranged one behind the other. The closest dot is to the right of the middle dot, and the farthest dot is to the left of the middle dot. And so close is the one on the right, and the one that's far away is the one on the left, and that middle one being then in the middle. So the camera will take a picture of all 3 dots. Okay? And what will happen is the focus of our lens will be on that middle dot, which comes out in our perfect focus. It's perfect. The other 2 dots appear in focus to our naked eye, but when looking at the photo very closely, the dot in the front and the dot behind are appearing as circles instead of perfect dots. So what's happening is they are technically out of focus, but to our naked eye, they appear in focus. They appear still as dots. So it's only through that photo that we actually see they are not in focus. So the circle of confusion is the diameter of a dot such that when we view it with the naked eye, it appears in focus. And if this circle gets past the diameter, then our eyes tell us that it's out of focus. This is confusing. I know, it's very confusing. Many professional photographers don't even use or understand the circle of confusion. Sometimes it's called COC or COF. So this is something that is much more concerning to lens manufacturers. This is something that they deal with in developing and manufacturing of their lenses. The typical photographer will not quite understand the circle of confusion.